Dear friends, Mental Health Sunday. If there ever was a time, if there ever was a way in which we wanted to understand what the experience of folk with a mental illness, a serious mental illness, or brain disorder, all we need to do is to read the words of Psalm 88 or listen to the words of Hear My Prayer from Psalm 55. The feelings of sadness, isolation, anger, abandonment, mistrust, emptiness, hopelessness, the experience of those with severe mental illness are all given voice. Christianity, unfortunately, particularly in the West, has created a divide between body and soul that often focuses on the care of the soul in our churches, with little attention to how the health of mind, body, and soul are integrated. We often overlook the prevalence of mental health in our churches. In fact, in many places, those with mental illnesses are often further marginalized by behavioral and spiritual requirements that through faith, you should get better. You'll find happiness and learn to serve and not be served. Yet in reality, nearly 1 in 5 adults experience mental illness in a given year. 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness. 17% of youth between the ages of 6 through 17 experience a mental disorder. We need to name this reality, recognize it, that it lives within us as a congregation, possibly even with us as individuals, and understand what those experiences are. At its worst, some people experience utter rejection from the church, where they may be told that their suffering is the punishment for their sins, and they're called to repentance as a precondition to healing. It's a test. You are being put through the refining fire. I should pause here because I forgot to begin by saying this sermon may bring up some difficult emotions and feelings within some of us, because the subjects of mental health, self-harm, and suicide are difficult to hear and to talk about. And if you feel the need to leave, to walk around, to process what you're feeling, please feel free to do so. I'm not looking to trigger anybody and give you any further grief. We also may hear the old trite, God will never give you more than you can handle. God does not give mental illness or any other disease or suffering as a test of our faith or as a punishment for a lack thereof. But we need to recognize that in our wider society, there are systemic policies that prevent health and healing. It's important for us to recognize that who we are and how and where we live are critical factors in access to mental health care. Policymakers lately seem to propose bills that get expansive coverage cut for mental health And insurance companies that are for profit rather than nonprofit create barriers to access for care. In the psalm, the composer has written a prayer for help, a psalm of deep lament that stands out in the book of Psalms for the extent and the severity of the complaint to which it gives voice. Day and night I cry out before you. My soul is full of troubles. My life is ending. I'm like those who go down to the pit, that place that refers to the diminishment or impairment of our human well-being. In the psalm, the psalmist has exhausted every way in which to get God's attention. The psalmist has used every possible approach at every possible moment, and still the result is silence, darkness. In fact, the only petition in the psalm is in verse 2. Let my voice reach you, O God. Please listen to my prayer. In his work on the Psalms, Walter Brueggemann tells us that Israel is profoundly aware of the dissonance between its core claims of faith, that the complete obedience will lead to shalom, and the reality of life's experience, that even if we lead an obedient life, it is not always rewarded, and one can even suffer significant troubles in ways one would think shouldn't have happened to us. For example, the late Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. The psalmist here writes in the tradition of candor and truth-telling, rather than glossing over the very real differences between reality and faith claims. In fact, what we find in Psalm 88 is truth-telling in lament, even when that truth-telling would seem to be damaging to God's reputation and character. Our churches need to shift away from stigmatizing mental health as a moral failing or the result of some personal sin, and instead promote theologies and provide resources that support and sustain those with mental health issues and their families. As the Reverend Pam Rocker from Hillhurst United Church of Canada writes, promoting the care of the whole self, which can be called intelligent flesh. More people should be encouraged to speak up in our faith communities about who they are and how mental health issues affect them and their loved ones. We need to remind those who suffer in silence that they need not do so. They are not alone, that they are worthy of getting the support they deserve without judgment or stigma. It is more imperative that we begin a discourse about mental health in our churches so that we are not silencing those who live with experiences of mental illness. The back of the bulletin lists some things that we can do. First, to be a friend. Proverbs 17 tells us a friend loves at all times. Learn to listen without judgment. To provide companionship and compassion to those going through tough times. To offer rides or meals to those who need help. Above all, to respect their confidentiality, and to avoid shame or guilt. Something very personal. If we have been through an experience, share our story. Be open. Come out of the closet, so to speak, as someone who has experienced mental health issues and received help, or as someone who struggles with it on a regular basis. When it affects our families, when it is our own children that struggle with thoughts of suicide, speak about it so that others are able to understand and to walk alongside both you and your family member. Encourage them to get help. Because help not only comes from the scriptures, help also comes from the medical community. We can certainly get darn good help if we reach out for it. And sometimes that's the hardest step for someone with a problem, to be able to do that, but to give them the encouragement they need to reach out and continue to do so. Our language that we use is so important, that we don't stigmatize people because they've had an episode. Learn the facts. I know in this day of alternative facts, they may seem like they're hard to find, but I might suggest good places to start are the National Alliance on Mental Illness and the National Institute of Mental Health. There are a multitude of resources on those websites. Because in our communities today, especially in the time of COVID and post the pandemic, we are all changed. We all struggle with anxiety or depression or isolation, or the feeling that in some way we may have failed. But one thing that is an underlying theme that comes out through this psalm, in spite of all of the complaints, in spite of all the questions of God, the psalmist still has hope, because the psalmist says, I will not stop speaking. I will not stop crying out to you, God, until you answer me, until you pay attention to me. We have to do that same thing for those in our lives that need that help, for those that need the assurance they are not alone. Especially as we approach June, Pride Month, particularly problems show up amongst LGBTQ folks, whether they're teens coming to an understanding of themselves, or they're 40-year-olds who finally come to an understanding of themselves. The anxiety that comes up often leads to suicide. And I don't mean to say it's only in that community. It exists with us all. But that hope needs to be held out to folks. It is why being an open and affirming church, we need to make sure that our welcome is wide, that everyone, regardless of what they come through the door carrying, we help them understand that we will lift it up and carry it with them. We will walk alongside. We will help. We will not push you out the door, but we will do what we are called to do. And that is not only preach about our God, but we will also love our neighbor. That we need to carry with us, not just on Mental Health Sunday, but on every Sunday throughout the year. May God give us the grace to walk through our lives, to walk beside those who need it. And if we are the ones who once in a while need to reach out, speak up. Someone will walk alongside you. That is part of who this church is. May it be so.